The mysterious, the macabre, the out of this world. The following are real people. They have real stories, and they've had real encounters. Here tonight on Newsworthy, two words and two question marks.
He's alive! Have you checked the children? Get out!
Hello, and welcome to Encounters. Tonight we have not one, not two even, but three stories that'll leave you shaking your head saying, how is that real? When in fact, it's absolutely factual true life. Let's get started. Let's start today with Project Sunshine. Project Sunshine was a secret U.S. government program during the 1950s, primarily focused on studying the effects of nuclear radiation, especially fallout on human health. Here's a little bit more detail. After World War II, there were growing concerns about the effects of nuclear weapons and radiation exposure, particularly with the beginning of atmospheric nuclear tests. Project Sunshine was initiated by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission in the 1950s to study the impact of radioactive fallout, particularly from nuclear tests, on the human body. The project's main goal was to understand the impact of radioactive fallout on humans, especially on the tissue and organs of the human body. Researchers studied the effects of radiation, specifically from strontium 90, which can be found in fallout from nuclear explosions. To gather the data, researchers often use human tissue samples, and a highly controversial aspect of Project Sunshine was the way in which these samples were obtained. In many cases, the bodies of deceased individuals, including infants and children, were exhumed without the knowledge or consent of the families. These bodies were often from stillborns or infants, as well as other people who had recently passed away. The collection of human remains without consent and the secrecy of the project sparked significant ethical concerns. And it wasn't until later that these practices became publicly known. Many saw it as a violation of basic human rights and ethics in scientific research. While the project provided valuable data on radiation's effects on humans, its unethical practices led to criticism, particularly regarding the treatment of the deceased. Eventually, in the 1960s, the project was shut down and nuclear testing was moved underground to avoid further exposure to the public. Project Sunshine is now remembered as one of the darker chapters in the history of nuclear research, particularly because of the unethical methods used to gather the data. It also serves as a reminder of the public's evolving sensitivity to privacy, consent, and ethical research practices in science. I can't imagine finding out that one of my youth has been dug up for scientific research without my consent. What about you? Hey, and while we're here, let's take a quick break. Log on to Smoking Gun Jerky of Lincoln, Nebraska, and pick out your favorite jerky product. They have over 50 different types of jerky, seasonings. Uh, they have recipes to make your own jerky. Anyway, use Cryptid 10. That's Cryptid 10 for an awesome discount on an amazing product. Check them out. Now, from the United States, let's go talk about our brothers to the north, the Canadians. They're not, what do you say, innocent of weird practices either. In fact, in the 1960s, the Canadians had what they called a GADAR machine. It is the work of Dr. John Money, a psychiatrist and sexologist. This machine, while not exactly a GADAR in the modern sense of the word, was part of experiments and efforts in the 1960s that attempted to identify and or detect that someone was gay based on their physiological responses. During the 1950s and the 1960s, there was a significant amount of pseudoscience surrounding sexuality, particularly regarding homosexuality. Homosexuality was still criminalized in many places, including Canada, and was widely considered a mental illness by many in the medical and psychological fields. So it only makes sense that the GADAR machine, or the homosexual detection machine, was part of a broader trend in which scientists and psychologists tried to measure and or diagnose homosexuality using various methods, many of which today are considered deeply unethical. This machine, developed by Dr. Robert Wake, was part of a series of experiments at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal during the 1960s. The device aimed to use physiological responses such as pupil dilation, skin conductivity, and heartbeat changes as an indication of sexual orientation. The machine worked by having the individuals look at sexually explicit images, both heterosexual and homosexual, and the device recorded their physiological responses. The idea was, according to the theorists of the time, homosexual individuals would show different or physiological responses to homosexual images than heterosexuals would. The idea of using a machine to detect someone's sexual orientation raised significant ethical concerns, even back then. The method was based on a flawed assumption about human sexuality, and it did not account for the complexity or fluidity of sexual orientation. The experiments were invasive and often conducted without proper full consent or understanding of the patients. Moreover, the idea of detecting someone's sexuality or sexual orientation was rooted in the deeply stigmatized and pathologized view of homosexuality, which was still classified as a mental illness in many places, including Canada, until the late 1970s. While the gaydar machine may seem absurd and outdated today, it was part of a broader effort during that time to try to define, measure, and even correct sexual orientation. The use of this machine was largely discredited over time, and modern understandings of sexuality are far more complex and nuanced. In the end, the gaydar machine was part of a long and troubling history of psychological and medical practices aimed to control or fix people based on their sexual orientation. And it is an example of how pseudoscience can be used to enforce social prejudices. Isn't that crazy? I thought so. So let's end this night together on something a lot less heavy. In 1982, Atari released E.T. the Extraterrestrial, a video game based on the popular movie. The game was developed in a very short time frame, just 5 weeks, in order to capitalize on the movie's massive popularity. E.T. was supposed to be a huge hit, but it turned out to be a massive commercial failure. The video game, not the movie. Many players found the game confusing and frustrating, which led to terrible sales. Atari had overestimated demand and had produced millions of copies, even though the game didn't sell as expected. As a result, they were left with a huge surplus of unsold cartridges. The failure of ET game combined with the overall decline of video game market at the time contributed to the video game crash of 1983. To deal with the unsold ET cartridges, Atari allegedly made the decision to bury them in a landfill in New Mexico. Now, this reason was largely logistical. Atari didn't want to deal with the financial burden of storing or destroying the unsold cartridges. Burying them in a landfill in the desert seemed like a more cost effective solution at the time. There were also rumors that Atari wanted to keep the surplus out of public view so not to tarnish the company's image. The exact details of the burial remained unclear for many years, and the story became kind of a gaming legend. However, in 2014, the legend of the buried ET cartridges was confirmed when a team from the documentary Atari Game Over unearthed a portion of the games near New Mexico. Using a permit with the local government, they excavated part of the landfill and found thousands of ET cartridges, along with other Atari items that had been buried under several feet of dirt. While not all the cartridges were in perfect condition, the discovery helped confirm that Atari had indeed buried the unsold games in the desert. This event since has become an iconic part of video game history, symbolizing both the peak and the fall of the early video game industry. The ET game and the burial of the unsold cartridges became a metaphor for the decline of the early gaming boom. With a rapid rise and equally rapid collapse, the burial itself became an enduring symbol of video game excess and failure, and the story continues to fascinate gamers and pop culture enthusiasts to this day. Well, that was a little crazy, and I don't even understand. But I'm glad that they did it, and we found out that it was true. What other conspiracy theories that have been proven true would you like to hear about here on Newsworthy? Be sure to reach out to us and let us know. And thank you for always joining us tonight on Encounters. And Jerry, if you can't see the light,
Be the light.